Good afternoon, everyone. Invocation this afternoon will be offered by Don Clemmer. Don?
In light of today's topic, I thought who better to hear from than Eleanor Roosevelt. What follows is not an excerpt of any sort of writing by Mrs. Roosevelt, but is rather an amalgamation of quotes attributed to her on the internet. The result is sort of a motivational mixtape, which I will proceed to read to you and do my best not to fall into the Eleanor Roosevelt cadence. Given the sourcing, I'm fairly certain that the former First Lady said most of these things. But as Abraham Lincoln said, don't believe everything you read on the internet. A pep talk by Eleanor Roosevelt. We do not have to become heroes overnight. You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. People grow through experience if they meet life honestly and courageously. This is how character is built. Nothing has ever been achieved by the person who says it can't be done. Do what you feel in your heart to be right, for you'll be criticized anyway. You wouldn't worry so much about what others think of you if you realized how seldom they do. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die. And the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility. It takes courage to love, but pain through love is the purifying fire which those who love generously know. When will our conscience grow so tender that we will act to prevent human misery rather than avenge it?
Thanks, Don. Well-chosen words. Our presenter today is Dee Hoffman. Typical of her forethought and organization, she not only emailed her introduction to Al, but she printed out a copy just in case he got a flat tire. Dee Hoffman intended to have a career as a music educator. After 1 week of student teaching, which included a very small room with 10 fifth graders on snare drums, not pads, she decided that was not the route for her. Students everywhere do not know how lucky they are. Instead, she switched to music therapy. After working for 7 years in a maximum security forensic facility in California, she again made a switch. She headed to the University of Tennessee for graduate school and earned a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, which you may hear about more in the paper. As things tend to happen, an internship in Detroit with the Saturn Corporation led to a job with GE Motors here in Fort Wayne in 1987. So for the last 30 years, she worked as a management consultant in a variety of organizations, from appliance factories to paper mills. She was a longtime partner with Competitive Human Resources Strategies, a consulting group based out of Rhode Island. She has co-authored several papers and a 2011 shared Author of the Year from the World of Work Journal. Currently, she works as an evaluator with the National Science Foundation and evaluates and coaches research groups. She has centers in such diverse topics as material data science, advanced research in drying, and electrification and automation of trucking. Please don't ask her to explain these topics. She was introduced many years ago to the Rotary Club of Fort Wayne by her father. by the father of our past president, Susan Trent. Now a past president of Rotary, she remains active, and in particular with the Youth Exchange Program and Interact, the service club she began at Homestead High School. Dee's also consulted with various nonprofit organizations in Fort Wayne and served on various boards, and is currently on the board of AWRC and is a graduate of Leadership Fort Wayne. On the private side, her husband, Ron Bifus, is now a retired engineer from Regal. They have 2 daughters, one a musician for hire, and the other in a master's program at IU. This is Dee's 4th Quest paper. Dee Hoffman.
Women have always shaped America. Indeed, they've shaped the world. Sometimes in large ways, sometimes in small. Some not recognized until much later. Some never. In elementary school, most of us heard about Sacagawea, Harriet Tubman, Ruby Bridges, Rosa Parks, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Fort Wayne's Hamilton sisters. Many know of our foremothers fighting for women's suffrage and equality. Quest members, some of them nominated themselves, and not that I'm going to out anybody, but I'm staring at the person. But we recently heard of Belle Green, Katherine Johnson, and Frances Perkins. There are more among the known, and they have been celebrated in our books, our history, and with statues, and deservedly so. But, and yes, there's a but, there's a conspicuous difference when placed alongside with what we know about men's history. Talking with people about this paper, I'd often hear, "You have to write about X." And I'd have to admit, I'd never heard of X. The quester's response, whether male or female, was invariably, well, who writes the history? And yes, research backs a significant underrepresentation of women in U.S. history text, an important source of our collective learning. A study of those texts over 3 decades showed substantially fewer mentions of women. Even a glance at the listings of past Quest papers showed men were the vast majority. There's good news. As mentioned, there has been a steady increase over the decades. I seem to have a fireplace here. Okay, well, you can see this coming up soon. It's a steady increase over the decades. In the 1960s, it was 11 women for every 100 men. By 2000, it had increased to up to 16 women for every 100 men. So that is a good increase. Quest topics reflect this as well. We can talk later about whether this will hold or not, but for now, let's celebrate some of the ones we know. They deserve credit. And let's shine a light on some that we may not know, who also deserve it. Let's start. And again, look at this. Oh, we're getting close. You can look at the side here. Well, maybe not. Okay, let's start. The rights of the individual should be the primary object of all governments. An early revolutionary writer, one who had great influence. No, not Thomas Jefferson, nor John Adams. Mercy Otis Warren, which is the next one. Born in 1728 into a prosperous Massachusetts family, she pled for and received a classical education. In 1754, she married a politician. Both her activist family and husband gave proximity to leaders of the American Revolution. Over time, she too became an activist. Writing was her weapon of choice, allowing access to places she was denied as a woman. She often published anonymously. This allowed her work to be taken seriously, since women often weren't. She used plays to satirize Crown officials, particularly targeting the Massachusetts Royal Governor, Thomas Hutchinson. She also corresponded with other revolutionaries. Founding fathers, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, encouraged her. Adams praised her judgment as well as saying to others, "God Almighty has entrusted her with powers which he bestows on very few of the human race." After the Revolution, she was vehemently against the Federalist nature of the proposed Constitution. She was particularly concerned about the potential corruption of rulers and unchecked authority. Obviously, she wasn't successful in blocking its ratification. However, her widely circulated pamphlet, Observation on the New Constitution, in which she noted the rights of the individual should be the primary object of all governments, was critical to the successful addition of our Bill of Rights. In the early 1800s, she wrote one of the first histories of the American Revolution, entitled History of the Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution. She faded from view until women's studies discovered her in the late 20th century. Clearly a founding mother, one that I think many of us had not known about, well, until now. Some women's work gets reinterpreted or even hijacked. As a result, their legacy is unfairly tainted. Here are two women that unexpectedly shared that fate. First, Phyllis Wheatley. While Mercy Warren was writing political observations, Phyllis Wheatley was writing beautiful poetry. Unexpected, as she was only 12 and had arrived in Boston in 1761 when a 7-year-old girl as a slave. Purchased by the Wheatley family of Boston, they realized she was extraordinarily intelligent. They educated her in history, literature, Greek, and Latin. When some of her poems were published, however, skeptics were sure an enslaved Black girl could never write them. So her owner convened a panel of 18 influential Bostonian men to verify she had actually written them. Led by Thomas Hutchinson, yes, the one skewered by Mercy Otis Warren, they examined her poems and interrogated her. All 18 men signed a certificate attesting she was qualified to write them. Eventually, her book, Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, with the attestation at the front, and I believe you can see that right here. John Hancock is one of the signers. Got published in London in 1773. Well received, it brought her fame both sides of the Atlantic, even receiving praise from Voltaire and George Washington. In 1773, she was emancipated by the Wheatley family and hit hard times. Sadly, the first African-American published author died at age 30 in 1784. Her legacy: abolitionists used her as an example of the equal capacity of Black people. But by the 19th century, her work was criticized for not firmly denouncing slavery. She was especially censured for her most famous poem on being brought from Africa to America, which begins, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land," as seeming to show thankfulness for her theft from Africa. This view of her work continued in the 20th century. In 1966, Northwestern professor Seymour Gross famously stated, "This Negro poetess so well fits the Uncle Tom syndrome: pious, grateful, retiring, and civil." In the early 2000s, her work was revisited by the director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute, Henry Louis Gates Jr. Among other things, he notes she did write poems that speak about the evils of slavery, but given her historical context as an enslaved person, she absolutely could not be strident and direct, writing instead, "I, young in life, by seeming cruel fate, was snatched from Africa's fancied happy seat." He does not see her as a race traitor, but as a legitimate poet and worthy of reclaiming by Black Americans. Unexpectedly, there's a similarity between the legacies of the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin and Phyllis Wheatley. Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852 to show the horrors of slavery. It certainly did. An instant bestseller, this emotional story sparked emotional response. In it, Uncle Tom is a moral character who dies as a Christ-like martyr, refusing to divulge two runaways' location. It was extraordinarily effective at galvanizing support for abolition. Not surprisingly, there was a reaction, and mainly in the South. Anti-Tom novels sprang up, refuting her portrayal of slavery. Instead, these novels showed Black characters as submissive and satisfied with their lot. Minstrel shows revising the storyline did the same and added racist caricatures. Calling someone an Uncle Tom became, and to a great extent still is, considered a pejorative label indicating someone is a race traitor. Reclaiming her legacy. Similar to his work on Phyllis Wheatley, Henry Louis Gates Jr. takes a new look at Uncle Tom's Cabin. He urges a consideration of the context of her time and asks us to note the hijacked and shifting view of Uncle Tom. He asks how African Americans judge what is Black enough. Clearly, this is a nuanced topic and worthy of further exploration, perhaps in a future Quest paper. Suffice it to say, both Phyllis Wheatley and Harriet Beecher Stowe might be unpleasantly surprised to see what has happened to their beloved work. Suffragettes and more. 1840, the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London, a pivotal moment for the women's rights movement in America. If that sounds a little strange, wait. 2 American women attended. Entering the hall, they found women were required to sit in the back in a curtained, segregated area. They were denied the right to speak or vote. Ironic considering this was a rights convention. Walking back to the hotel, the 2 who had not known each other prior discussed the events of the day, I suspect with a lot of energy. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton then resolved to hold a convention when back home. 8 years later, the Seneca Falls Convention was held. Over 300 people attended. A national women's movement grew and included many other familiar names, among them Susan B. Anthony, Lucy Stone, and Alice Paul. One name, however, we might not know, Matilda Gage. Let's look at her. Matilda Gage was born in 1826, raised by a progressive and abolitionist family. She was a major leader in the women's movement. In addition to suffrage, she promoted indigenous rights, the separation of church and state, and the right to abortion. She became seen as too radical, leading to her eviction from the movement. She wasn't done. She was also a writer. Of interest for us is her writing on women and inventions. Noting throughout history, it's been thought that women did not have the intellect to contribute to science and invention. She disagreed. In her 1870 volume, Women as Inventor, Gage pointed out numerous cases proving the opposite. Among them were Emily Goss Davenport, inventor of the deep sea telescope, Sarah Mather, co-inventor of the early electric motors, and other held patents, such as Margaret Knight, who invented and designed the flat-bottom bag. Mary Walton invented a smoke burner. Gage also claimed the horseshoe machine and the origin of the cotton gin came from women, but were credited to men. She had questions. Why don't we know about these women? Why aren't there more patents held by women? And her answer, women's education was limited. Lives were often dominated by domestic labor. Being inventive was seen as unfeminine. And often the laws gave husbands control over their wives' work and their pay. Her conclusion? Women's inventions were often taken, hidden, or credited to men, and they profited from it. She was one of the first to note and document this. Sadly, Matilda Gage experienced this herself, and today there are few that know who she is, although that is changing. Naming the pattern. Let's skip to almost 100 years later, almost exactly, 1969. Margaret Rossiter was a history of science student at Yale University. During an informal gathering, she asked professors present if there had ever been women scientists. Their answers? No, none, never. Even a mention of Nobel Prize winner Madame Curie cast her as a helpmate to her husband. This troubled her, but like all good PhD students, she focused on completing her degree and her dissertation on agricultural chemist. It was only later, during postdoc work at Harvard, she decided to investigate the claim further. Upon perusal of the American Men of Science, an early reference book, she discovered there were hundreds of women listed within. often noting they were tucked in or initials were used instead of first names. Well, this did it. This set her life mission. For the next 5 decades, she went on an excavation to bring women's contributions to light. Along the way, she uncovered a multitude instances of not just inadvertent loss, but deliberate theft. Not just stuck in the shadows, but deliberately hidden. Remember Matilda Gage? During her journey, Rossiter discovered her 1870 Women as Inventor pamphlet, and Rossiter coined the invisibility of women's accomplishments in science as the Matilda effect. This gave a name to the pattern. Although Rossiter initially was focused on science, it's clear it applies to all manner of endeavors. Valor denied, delayed, restored. Let's continue. There are many ways to lose credit. Fortunately, these women's stories finally did see the light, some delayed, restored, and some too late. By the end of the Civil War, the Union Army had had an estimated 6,000 to 8,000 surgeons in service. Women were not allowed to be formally commissioned, but they could serve as contract surgeons. Dr. Mary E. Walker did so unpaid. She experienced all war has to offer, which included service in the battlefield, service in hospitals, and a stint as a prisoner of war. In 1865, President Andrew Jackson awarded her the Medal of Honor. He acknowledged she was technically not allowed to receive it as she was not commissioned. Nonetheless, as president, he said she'd earned it. Well, in 1917, her medal was revoked since she wasn't commissioned, which again, women could not be. I love her. She refused to surrender it. And henceforth, until her death in 1919, she wore it when in public. In 1977, long later, President Carter restored it. DNA's discovery, a murky past. Cambridge University, England, 1953. 2 scientists rushed to the Eagle pub across the street proclaiming, "We have discovered the secret of life." Revealing the structure of DNA was a major discovery, providing the foundation for modern genetics, and as it turns out, worthy of the Nobel Prize. One that was later awarded to James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins. Not included was Rosalind Franklin. Let's back up a bit. It's a complicated story and called one of the most egregious ripoffs in the history of science. Born in London in 1920, Rosalind Franklin was a Cambridge-trained scientist. She was initially involved in research on coal. There she gained expertise in X-ray crystallography, which is used to figure out the construct of very small objects. Well, that expertise led to a position at King's College in 1951 to work on the challenge of DNA imaging. At that time, it wasn't at all clear what DNA really looked like or how it stored and replicated genetic information. Her arrival at King's College was marred by unclear communication over authority. It resulted in a stressful relationship between her and a lab colleague, Maurice Wilkins. The poor relationship would prove to her detriment in the future. Regardless, within weeks, she transformed the research there. Over at Cambridge, 2 scientists, British James Watson and an American, Francis Crick, were racing to be the first to build a DNA model. Lack of good data rendered early efforts flawed. This was sharply pointed out by Franklin during a presentation, winning her no friends. She continued at King's, creating new techniques, adapting a camera, and was able at last to obtain the now famous Picture 51. The clearest image of DNA ever taken. She then wrote a report summarizing her data and conclusions. Remember the poor relationship between her and lab colleague Wilkins? He took photo 51 without Franklin's knowledge or permission and showed it to Watson and Crick. The 2 also gained access to her written report, again without her knowledge or permission. Watson later described it as an aha moment. With the picture and report data, they deduced the double helix structure of the DNA. They published this finding in 1953 in Nature magazine. A very slight nod was given to her in a footnote. We have also been stimulated by a knowledge of the general nature of the unpublished experimental results and ideas of Dr. Wilkins, Dr. Franklin, and their co-workers. That knowledge was not general, it was specific. Franklin congratulated them on the discovery, which has affected all the world, including America. She went on to other research. She actually interacted with both Watson and Crick later. In 1958, she died of ovarian cancer, never knowing their discovery relied on seeing her work. Nor did others. Watson and Crick, when awarded the Nobel Prize in 1962, did not acknowledge her critical contribution. As often happens, truth was eventually revealed. In his book, The Double Helix, Watson, while portraying Franklin in various insulting and misogynistic ways, also acknowledged the unofficial acquisition of information, saying, "Rosie, of course, did not directly give us her data. For that matter, no one at King's realized they were in our hands." Indignation from other researchers motivated Watson to give some credit, but sadly, too late for her. Charles Darrow, what's a man doing here? Like so many during the Great Depression, Charles Darrow was searching for ways to support his family. He remembered playing a popular game with friends. He copied their homemade version and adapted it. In 1935, he sold it to Parker Brothers. This is the now famous Monopoly. The story of a desperate father led a mythology to its creation. The only problem? It actually wasn't his to sell. Years earlier, during the Gilded Age, a young inventor in Washington, D.C., Elizabeth Magie, became concerned about land monopolies. Hang in there. She saw them contributing to a growing divide between the rich and the poor. In 1904, she invented and patented the landlord's game as a teaching tool about the evil of monopolies. She wrote 2 sets of rules, one where the game was cooperative and all could win, and one where it's capitalistic and there was one winner. 2 bets which was most popular. It became popular and people often played homemade versions. Several universities used it in economics classes. A glance at the 2 shows similarities to each other. Unlike Rosalind Franklin, who died before she could discover the theft of her work, Magie was alive when Parker Brothers produced Monopoly. She protested. Newspaper accounts carried her story. Parker Brothers then gave $500 to her for her creation. I don't know. She accepted, thinking at least it would keep the education going, and I think we can all agree that didn't happen. Meanwhile, Darrow made enough money to retire at 46, a millionaire. To go on, Parker essentially buried Magie's invention and kept Darrow's heartwarming story as their legend. Plot twist here. Ironically, she was rediscovered when more recently, in the 70s, a professor attempted to patent an anti-monopoly game and entered a fight with Parker Brothers. In the ensuing battle, Maggie's story was brought to life. Although monetary award is beyond her grasp, she should now get the credit she deserves. And Monopoly continues to this day, both the game and in the real world. Emerging visibility. Some women lived long enough or did enough of note that their impact was hard to ignore. Lillian and Frank Gilbreth were an unusual couple for the early 20th century. She was a psychologist emphasizing physical and mental well-being of workers. He was an expert in time-motion study and used film to analyze work processes. Their joint goal was efficiency by eliminating unnecessary movements and fatigue in human motion work. They believed systems could be adapted for workers and thus were early pioneers of ergonomics and the inclusion of the disabled. They worked to ensure jobs were designed with workers' abilities in mind by using specialized tools, equipment, workstation, and breaking down tasks. In their business, they were true partners, but not necessarily seen this way by others. He was more famous due to his public appearances and his sex. Publications together usually had his name first and hers without a PhD and often with just her initials. In 1924, Frank died suddenly. She was 46. Shortly afterwards, most corporate clients canceled their contracts. She worked quickly to build the company by giving lectures and teaching classes. Still not regaining enough business, her son later said she decided if the only way to enter a man's field was through the kitchen door, that's the way she'd enter. Working with GE and others, she consulted on how to improve kitchen layouts and appliance designs. She's responsible for the design of work triangles in kitchens to ease the flow. She also gave refrigerators drawers, invented the foot pedal trash can, and designed many other improvements. Her reputation spread and expertise was sought by companies, government, universities, and even the White House. She could now leave the kitchen whenever she wanted. In 1935, she became the first woman engineering professor at Purdue. In 1965, at age 87, she became the first woman elected to the National Academy of Engineering. Along the way, she received over 20 honorary doctorate degrees, among numerous other awards. She is considered one of the pioneers of a new field, industrial organizational psychology. She did all this while raising her sizable family and applying efficiency principles with them as well. I may have forgotten to mention that, but maybe you knew it. Two of her children immortalized it in the book and later the movie, Cheaper by the Dozen. She was all that and more. Out of the shadows. Get the girl to check the numbers. The 44-year-old girl, Katherine Johnson, a human computer working for NASA Flight Research, did so and affirmed they were good. Upon being told, John Glenn, knowing she had the right stuff, responded, "If she says they're good, then I'm ready to go." And yes, this really happened. Johnson confirmed by hand the computer calculations for the Mercury orbit. Essentially, she checked the computer system's work. Although known within NASA, she and some other human computers, Mary Jackson and Dorothy Vaughan, were hidden in the shadows until 2016. You may remember them from the book and movie Hidden Figures, or Sister Elise's 2022 Quest paper, Katherine Goebel Johnson. Johnson also received numerous awards, and at age 97 was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom by our first African-American president. Perhaps this is fitting because she was not only a woman, but an African-American. Forgive me, I had to. No writing on women who shaped America would be complete without mentioning Sarah Blakely. With no fashion background, she fashioned her own prototype of an undergarment by cutting the feet off pantyhose. She was rejected by investors and hundreds of businesses. She persuaded one mill to take a chance. She handled all the marketing, the patents, and the packaging herself. After Neiman Marcus bought her project, Oprah listed it on her annual list of favorite things. Sales skyrocketed. She built a billion-dollar company and changed the shape of America. Literally. What was it? Spanx. Recognized in their time. Listen carefully here. In 1930, Mr. Francis Oldham was offered a pharmacology assistantship at the University of Chicago. Knowing the university preferred men, Miss Francis Oldham's advisor urged her to accept without correcting the honorific. America may be glad she did. Years later, in 1960, the now Dr. Francis Oldham, with new last name of Kelsey, at the Food and Drug Administration was tasked with the safety review of a new drug, Kevadon. It had already been approved and distributed in 46 other countries. Despite high pressure from the company and from doctors, she refused approval, citing inadequate evidence. A year later, German and Australian researchers found Kevadon, generic name of thalidomide, linked to a series of rare birth deformities such as shortened or missing limbs. America was spared the impact of thalidomide due to one woman who could have missed the whole event. She deserved recognition. She got it. In 1962, President Kennedy awarded Kelsey the President's Medal of Service. Some save lives. It's 2012. An NYPD cop is on the patrol in a stairwell. The suspect comes down with a silver gun and fires. He's hit at point blank range, but continues down 4 more floors before eventually collapsing. "I think I've been hit," he says. Turns out that's a bit of an understatement. He should have been dead. Instead, he left the hospital the next day. Why? Much credit goes to Stephanie Kwolek. Stephanie Kwolek originally wanted to be a doctor. Cost of medical school motivated a shift in her career. After receiving a BS in chemistry from what is now Carnegie Mellon, she began researching with DuPont. There she stayed for her entire career. In the 1960s, she was assigned to find the next-gen high-performance fiber. To do this, she had to create polymers and find a liquid solvent that would dissolve them. Kwolek found a solution that was unlike anything we had previously seen in the laboratory, describing it as cloudy, opalescent when stirred, and of low viscosity. Usually these would be discarded, but she used, as later she described it, intuition in the scientific process. She had several discussions with the spinner until she finally convinced him to spin it into threads. When she stood by the equipment, she found that it was really difficult to break the produced threads. She knew then it was an unusual fiber. It sure was. The testing department found it 5 times stronger than steel. Kwolek gave some of the fiber to one of the scientists. They used it to weave material and tested it by firing into it. Thus was the first generation of Kevlar vest. Today, it's widely used in many applications, such as brake pads for cars. Too bad I wasn't on that tire that Al had. We know it mostly from vests like the ones that saved our police officer. A Kevlar survivor group estimates 3,000 lives to date have been saved. And that's not including the saved dogs. Yes, there's Kevlar vests for dogs, as there should be. Are we home free? Women have shaped America in many ways, helping to create better lives for all. Recognition of this has thankfully increased, particularly over the last decades. We see and we hear of women contributing and being celebrated in all manner and in all realms. This includes recent Nobel Prize winners such as Jennifer Doudna, who is actually a scientific descendant of Franklin, Crick, and Watson, with CRISPR gene editing. Catalin Carrico with mRNA therapeutics, Claudia Golden in economics, Louise Gluck in literature. Other accomplished women include Fei-Fei Li in AI, not AA1, AY. Mary Barra, who is the GM, CEO, high-ranking military officers. Amanda Gorman, poet. Marin Alsop, orchestral conductor. We see Supreme Court justices, senators, representatives, vice presidents. The list goes on. Or it did. Progress can be fragile. The lights may be dimming again. In 2025, we saw women erased or removed from positions of power and authority. This was especially so in the military, where most top female ranking officers were cleared out of their post. Their advancement there ascribed to DEI and not merit, or being too involved in DEI. Other governmental women have also been removed, including the head of the Library of Congress, archivist, and inspector generals. Arlington National Cemetery eliminated links to pages dedicated to women's military history. You can see on the left there, there's the links that used to be there. On the right is a shortened version, and they eliminated quite a few things, but women's military history was one. Historical content and photos documenting women's achievements have also been removed from armed forces websites. Visibility matters. Seeing yourself in history, in leaders, in any working field can be the first step in saying, I can do that. Presence matters. Every time a girl opens a book and finds a womanless history, she learns that she is worth less. Presence matters. Let us hope that women retain opportunity and remain free to shape America. The end.